Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. The title of today's webinar is The Role of Technology in Development. My name is Arcelia Gomez and I'm the Volunteers Relations Officer for Bankers Without Borders. That's Grameen Foundation's Global Volunteer Initiative. And today I'll be facilitating the technical side of the webinar. I'd like to briefly explain how we'll be handling questions today. You should all see a window for chat on your screen, and it includes a box for typing a question and a button labeled Submit Question. So you can use that throughout the webinar to submit your questions, and I'll be gathering those and asking our speaker today those questions at the end of the webinar. All of our webinars, as you might know already, are recorded, and they're made available on our volunteer portal under the My Volunteer, My Learning tab. They're also on our Bankers Without Borders website in about a week. So today's featured speaker is Steve Anderson, and he is the Chief Technology Officer for Grameen Foundation. He ensures that Grameen Foundation's technology strategy is closely aligned with its goal of empowering the poor to create a world without poverty. Before joining Grameen Foundation, Steve worked with technology and nonprofits for 13 years, and most recently at the Salesforce.com Foundation. He's helped thousands of nonprofits be more effective at delivering on their missions, and in his for-profit tech career, Steve led teams building and managing technology infrastructure in biotech and tech startups. He's also a graduate of Carleton College, so good shout out to anyone listening who's from that college. So without further ado, I'll hand over the presentation to Steve. As I mentioned, feel free to ask your questions throughout the webinar, and we'll get through as many of those as we can at the end of his presentation. Steve?
Great, thanks Arcelia. You hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Great. So the role of technology in development, this is a very big topic, and I'm going to try and cover some things that I think will be interesting and really look at it from kind of a high level of different patterns in technology and also some examples and some design principles. So when we look at objectives, first thing I want to talk about is this idea of efficiency and also of innovation. Then get into what we see people doing with technology in international development. And then as Grameen, we've been doing this work for 15 years, and we've learned some things about design that goes into technology that works. So first of all, efficiency versus innovation. In the world of technology, when we use technology, we really use it as a tool to solve problems. And there's a couple different kinds of problems that we look at, and a bunch fall into a category of increasing efficiency, and then there's this other category of innovation, and I want to talk a little bit about both and kind of point out the distinction because I think it's important to understand how technology is being used in international development. When you think about efficiency, it's really about getting a few percentage points better. It's about removing waste, increasing productivity, making practices repeatable, and really figuring out what a best practice is and making it so that customers, beneficiaries, employees, whoever your audience is, making sure that that's streamlined and efficient and effective. And it's really about creating kind of the standard operating procedure for whatever it is, whatever problem you're trying to solve with technology. And it can be incredibly impactful. We have seen technology used for all sorts of processes in business and nonprofit and international development where efficiency and repeatability through technology really increases impact and frees up resources for other uses. In the international development space, there's a lot of work that's being done with technology around increasing efficiency. What are the kind of current standards for running a health service, running a call center, dealing with a field force, and getting up to those standards? And what we find is that efficiency efforts in development can be very powerful because in the places in which we work, we're often pretty far behind the curve of what is the best practice. And like I said, when in some situations that can be significantly impactful, especially when that gap is very large. For example, moving from a paper-based process for tracking people's time and paying them to one that is electronic. That is really focused on efficiency. It's been done a million times by a million companies and nonprofits around the world, but doing it in rural Uganda can have a big impact. On the other side of this efficiency versus innovation conversation is, doing things that really haven't been done before. I mean, innovation is a word it's a buzzword, and it can kind of lose all meaning, but really what it comes down to is just doing new things in new ways. And it's about doing things that are risky. If you are providing phone support in Kenya for a field force that's working with the poor, creating a call center based on kind of the best practices of more developed business call centers isn't particularly risky. It might be difficult to do, but it's not really a new thing. Coming up with new ways of interacting with a field force that haven't been done, that's what innovation really is. It's trying new things, and those things will fail at a higher rate than kind of the efficiency efforts that you might undertake. And what innovation does is it kind of breaks into new spaces that can become the next efficiencies. Somebody invented the call center way back in the day. Somebody invented email. These things were brand new and risky and didn't work, and then over time they become the things that we all rely on. Another thing about innovation that can be really powerful is in creating a new innovative idea or system, it can often become a platform on which other things can be built. I think email is a great example. Really simple system for sharing information. The inventors of it probably had no idea how it would become a platform for communication around the world. Now, when we talk about innovation and development, it's pretty easy to think that there's a very clear flow. Developed markets are doing a lot of innovation around technology and how organizations operate, how people work with customers or beneficiaries, and that there's a lot of money in those markets, and there's a lot of competition, and that innovation happens there. And it's pretty easy to think, if you haven't worked in development, that innovation can easily flow to the developing world. What we found, and what the development space understands really well, is that it's not that easy to bring those innovations from developed places to less developed markets, and that it's that local context that is critical. And the other thing that we find is that while the West, or the more developed markets are building innovations that are solving problems, they aren't solving all the problems that exist in less developed places. And so there is a gap between what is being tried in the rest of the world and what needs to be tried to solve problems in the places in which Grameen works, for example. So I wanted to make that distinction between efficient technology that's used to increase efficiency. It's powerful, less risky, can be very impactful, And innovation, which is really about trying new things, is riskier but can have transformational breakthroughs that can then become platforms on which more innovation can occur. All right, so let's move on to some of the patterns that we see in technology use in the development space. I'm going to categorize them into 3 buckets right now. One is work around technology infrastructure, particularly communications infrastructure. Another is efforts to bring digital systems to places where they do not exist. And the third is creating new things that haven't been seen before. But before I get into those, I want to talk about a real dichotomy in development space, and that is the split between people who work in technology projects that exist in the disaster and post-conflict space and projects that exist outside of that. There's a lot of effort in the development space to go in after a conflict or a major disaster and provide benefit to the people affected by those events. There are unique things to working in this space that don't necessarily apply to the work that Grameen does, for example. One is when a disaster happens, you have to be ready for it, and you have to get on the ground very, very quickly. And so people who work in disasters focus very heavily on, are we ready for the next disaster? Where will it be? What might it be? And how are we going to get there in days rather than weeks? And it often involves bootstrapping systems from nothing. So if you think about Haiti after the major earthquake, Port-au-Prince was basically flattened in all senses of the word. And so people who went into the disaster area after the fact had to start from nothing. You can't have assumptions about power, about communications, about really anything. And so what they focused on in the Haiti example is how do we build a communications platform quickly that's reliable and useful, and often with a focus on NGO use. Because what happens in a disaster in a post-conflict space is these coordinated efforts where many NGOs who focus in this space come in and need to have their systems running. And so technology is often deployed to create a platform for that work. But that's not always the case. Those systems are often available to the general public and allow for communications and access to information in really interesting ways that can help people significantly. Grameen doesn't work in disasters and post-conflict spaces, and so this is not something that I'm focused on in my role at Grameen. But I wanted to call it out because it is a very significant part of the development sector and has some really different points of focus to do it well. All right, so back to technology. So I want to talk first about some of the undisputed champions in the world of technology for development right now. And I say right now because the world changes very quickly. First, the internet. This is a map of undersea cables connecting different parts of the world. And the internet is the most impactful piece of technology that has affected development in a very long time, perhaps ever. And as the internet has changed all of our lives, it has become really core to all technology for development initiatives at some level. And the other undisputed champion today is the phone. Not the smartphone yet, that's coming in a few years, but the feature phone. We now have more than one phone per person in the world, and even the very poor have access to a phone at over 50% in most places. Sometimes we see 70, 80%, 90% even. So the internet plus the phone have really changed what's possible in technology for development. And so those two things are central to really most projects. What I want to get into now is talk through 3 different patterns that we see, starting with technology projects that are focused on infrastructure. Information and communications technology, also known as ICT, and when you do ICT in development, it's called ICT 4D with the number 4 in there. We rely on ICT. I'm in Seattle. I rely on it every day. And there's an amazing amount of innovation that happens on top of this platform. And so we have a lot of folks in the development space who are working to put the infrastructure in place to allow folks in less developed places to have that same platform, that same access to information and platform innovation that we get. Really what it comes down to is the phone and data lines that kind of connect folks together, wireless coverage because that phone is the undisputed access point for the poor, internet access, and the devices, so phones and tablets, and then on top of that, software to keep it all running. And I've drawn a little picture to show you kind of the pieces where I see work being done in ICT for D in the infrastructure space. So over here we have a phone, smartphone, dumb phone, tablet, some device that talks to a local cell tower that connects via what's called a backhaul, which is a fiber optic or copper cable, to what I'm going to call the in-country internet, lowercase I. That in-country internet connects generally through an undersea cable to capital I, which is the worldwide internet. So there have been a lot of efforts to build out the wireless infrastructure in countries. These have generally shifted from development focus to commercial focus. Talk a little bit about that in the next slide. Google right now is in Kampala, is working to increase the in-country internet by a factor of 10 to say, well, what kind of things could happen if Kampala had 10 times the local internet, not really focusing on the connection to the rest of the world. And then there's continual efforts to bring in undersea cables to places. Those are generally commercial in nature, to connect the developing world, these developing markets, to the overall internet, to have access to the things that folks in Korea, Western Europe, and the US take for granted. Another form of connectivity is through satellite data and voice connections. And so this is a satellite phone, and there's a bunch of work around providing access to information, to cell services, to wireless services via satellites and even balloons in the case of Google's Loon project. And that connection can then come down either to the local country internet or to some other place in the world. And there are organizations who are working at all places in this spectrum. I want to talk about one project that Grameen did in the infrastructure space that continues today, but Grameen's not involved in it anymore. At Grameen Foundation, what we try and do is we try and focus on places where we can innovate and then prove out a model and push it to scale through partners and then move on to something else. And that's what we've done with the Village Phone project. So we were involved with the Village Phone project in the early 2000s. And the idea with the Village Phone project is that we worked in a couple countries to get a phone in the hands of poor women. And what we did, this was before wireless had taken over the world, cell communications had taken over the world, and phones were expensive and coverage was really poor in rural places. And so we worked with MTN, mobile network operator, to get phones in the hands of poor women, and then they would run a business where they would resell minutes at a profit. And it was an incredibly successful program where whole villages were connected to their families who lived in the city, markets that were too far away to get information quickly. And it was just a very powerful program that continues in Bangladesh today. And what it showed MTN and others was that there was a real need and a market in rural parts of the world where the very poor lived. And what we see today is that so many of the countries in which we work, there is cell phone access covering almost the entire country. It's not true of every underdeveloped country, but it is amazing how many places you can get a signal today, and that is partly because of the Village Phone project showed MTN and others that there's a desire out there. And if you build that infrastructure and price it right, that's a whole new market. It's an example of what Grameen does, where we go and we try a new innovative thing and it becomes a best practice through our work with a partner like MTN. So the next type of technology project I want to talk about is kind of these going digital projects. You can think of them as the less projects, going paperless, cashless, touchless, whatever less buzzword is popular at the moment. And these are primarily efficiency projects rather than innovation projects, but they can blur into innovation. And they're looking at getting to kind of best practice or even leapfrogging the best practice from other places in the world. Where we see them the most is in what the spaces in which we see them the most are electronic medical records. So many ministries of health around the world and even in developed countries have a really hard time with data. And going from paper-based systems or really weak electronic systems to more powerful and flexible and kind of consumer-focused electronic medical record systems is a big focus of a lot of development work. Better healthcare happens with electronic medical records. There's a lot of other things that go into it, but it's a big part of success. Logistics and warehousing is another great example where going digital can have a big impact. Moving things around from, the capital to regional warehouses to this growing network of local storage. You can think of vaccines as an example. Getting vaccines into the capital of any country that Grameen works in is pretty easy. Getting it to the hundreds, if not thousands, of places where vaccines might be used is a really difficult technical problem that developed markets have solved, but not in the same kind of environment in which we work. Another information, kind of digital information space is market information. Grameen, we work with a lot of farmers, and so access to market information can be very useful in helping folks get a better price for their crop. And so looking at ways to go from the blackboards of Ghana, for example, where you walk past a blackboard and it's got all the prices for the local markets and there's somebody who's gathering that information and publishing it via an actual blackboard, to online systems, mobile systems that do that. A lot of work being done in that space. Pardon me. And then the fourth space really is around efficiently distributing funds. There are a lot of large nonprofits who have large field forces and also distribute money to beneficiaries. And so there's a big effort around being better than cash, distributing payments and grants to people electronically. There's a much bigger space around kind of moving money around digitally, but in the kind of going digital category that I'm talking about, it's really an efficiency play around dispersing payments electronically. So I'll give you an example from Grameen's space, our MoTech work in Ghana. So what you're seeing here is a nurse for the Ghana Health Service getting trained in how to use a paper register to track maternal health. So on these 2 pages, there's 3 records for 3 pregnant women, and you can see there's dozens, if not 100 places to enter information over the course of a pregnancy. What the nurse has in her hand is a smartphone that allows her to rekey that information into a system that the district has access to. And so what we're doing is we're helping enter that digital information in a way that it lands at the district so that the district can understand what's going on, can run reports and can see trends and make decisions based on that, whether it's allocation of staff or resources, or if it's responding to common problems that show up as higher than in a previous period. You can imagine how difficult that kind of decision-making would be if all you have is paper registers that are distributed at hundreds of local clinics. And so that's very useful, and it also offers a jumping off point, because in our project in MoTech, we not only help them track that information at the district level, but having the phone in the hands of the nurse allowed them to easily register pregnant women into phone-based services, particularly our mobile midwife project, where we send periodic voice messages to pregnant women telling them the status, how their child is developing, what they should be thinking about, diet, dispelling myths, things like that. Another example in the mobile money space is a project where we have in Uganda called the Digital Financial Services Platform, DFS. And what we're doing in Uganda is to connect banks and mobile money operators into a network where money can float, and potentially minutes, cell phone minutes, can flow seamlessly between entities. Right now, the poor use mobile money, and they may have access to a bank account, but moving things between your mobile money account and a bank account, or between one bank account and another bank account, is almost impossible. And so we're working with a network of entities in Uganda to build what is really a platform, because once we connect these different aspects of the financial sector, then interesting applications can be built on top of that. The first is a simple wallet that allows a user to move money around. But once this platform exists, then all sorts of interesting applications can be built by us and others to utilize that platform. And so this is an example where it's really a best practice, although not a particularly successful one in more developed spaces where banks interact with each other and integrate with each other. The most difficult part of this kind of project is not the technology, but really the relationships between organizations that see themselves as competitors. So we'll go on to the last category of types of technology solutions, and these are the ones that I love the most, which are building the new things. Everybody likes new things, what we found is that these novel solutions really have to be targeted to very specific places, because what you're trying to do is solve a problem that exists in a context that hasn't been solved somewhere else. And you're often very limited by the existing infrastructure, and so you can have all sorts of great theoretical ideas about what's possible, but you're stuck with what you got. Now, there's a great story about a volunteer who came to Grameen years ago and was a technology person, really smart, really wanted to work with us, and his first idea in joining us was to do a reverse address lookup in Nairobi, so that no matter where you were, you could get the street address of the poor person you were interacting with. And it was pretty quickly that he figured out what we know at Grameen is that most of the poor people we work with don't actually have street addresses. And so it's this reframing of kind of expectations and assumptions to build something that works in an existing environment. And there's this pattern of innovation that we've seen time and again where you really have to focus on utilization. And utilization and use are words that are similar, but they're very different. I'll give you an example of what I mean. You would use a screwdriver to screw in a screw, but you would utilize a screwdriver to open a can of paint. It's this idea that you can use something for a use that it really wasn't intended for, but can be very useful at. And so when you're working in the places we work, we spend a lot of time looking around to say, well, what exists? And what can we rely on? And how can we utilize it to achieve our goals in a way that maybe is unexpected? So I'll talk about a novel use of technology and interaction that we've created in Colombia, where we work with poor coffee farmers and help them develop a farm management plan. And so this is a farmer and his family, and behind them on the wall is a poster of our farm management plan. And what we've done with our farm management plan is we work with a local cooperative, and the cooperative leads the relationship with farmers, which is really important. And what we do is we use mobile tools. We've helped them to use our tools, our technology tools, to go out into the community and have conversations with farmers. It starts with a really long kind of baseline survey to say, well, what do you have? What are you good at? What are you not good at? What do you want to do? What do you want to become as a farmer? And then we have a technology system that takes that data, which the data syncs directly from the tablet to our system, and we create recommendations and help the cooperative and the farmer create a plan based on their answers to the question. So it's a data-driven recommendation system. And then we built a whole human interaction system around it to help the farmer get to success. So I talked about that initial conversation. Cooperative visits through community knowledge workers who go out and visit the actual farmers on a schedule throughout the year, maybe 5 to 6 to 8 times, to help the farmer set the plan and stick to the plan. And it has proven to be really useful to farmers and to help them with the ultimate goal, which is to increase their income and also increase their resiliency around financial shocks. Another example of a novel solution that we've built that is pretty different from the farm management plan is an application we built called eKeys. And eKeys is designed to work with village savings and loans. Village savings and loans are groups of people who get together and encourage saving amongst each other. So there's usually a pretty strict set of rules about, that's a group of maybe 30 people, and everybody puts money in, and then that money gets loaned out. And there's a significant on-paper accounting process. We called our app eKeys because normally the center of a savings group like this is a box, a lock box that has the money and the ledgers in it that is locked by 3 different locks, and the keys are given to 3 different people. That's a way to ensure that not one person can abscond with the money or have the key stolen from them and have the money taken. And what we've built is a phone application that helps by backing up the ledger information that's tracked on paper. So again, there's another place where we're using digital system to help with a paper-based system. And you can imagine a time when it moves completely digital, but at the current state, keeping paper is often useful as a backup. The innovation that we came up with was to work with Barclays Bank to create a digital wallet that doesn't open with 1 passcode, but needs 3 passcodes to open. So it's an example of an application and a product that was created to solve a certain need that no one had really solved before. So those are the 3 buckets of kind of innovation technology for development projects that I've seen. I want to go into now some of the strategies that we see that work, and these aren't technology strategies so much as what we've learned about designing solutions and getting them to a place where they're successful. So I've got 4 principles here. First is that technology is just a tool. Second is we're going to talk about some of the things we've learned about design at Grameen, and we do webinars on our design process. It's very in-depth. I'm going to touch on it briefly and share some of the highlights. And then talk a little bit about how meeting the needs of the poor is not enough, and then talk a little bit about a pattern that we use a lot, which is intermediation. Technology is never enough as a solution. You know, the build it and they will come is never the thing. It never works. And the way we think about technology is we want to solve problems, and if technology can be useful in solving that problem, that's great. But there's a whole lot of places in the world and times when technology just hasn't made problems better, it's actually made them worse. And so when you're thinking about technology for development, you really have to think about how is technology going to help, and how is it going to be supported by other things that you do. Look at our farm management plan, for example, and you know, we use a paper poster on the wall. And we use a bunch of in-person visits because those parts are necessary to be successful. And the technology is necessary as well, but neither of them are sufficient, so they work together. So think about technology as a tool to solving a problem and not the answer. On the design side, there's 3 main principles that are important here. One is that you need to design contextually. I'll give a real quick story of that's non-development based to point this out. Gillette wanted to sell razors in India. They had no market penetration in India, and they were excited to sell tons and tons of razors to Indian men. And so they decided to design a razor specifically for the type of beard that Indian men have. They did focus groups with Indian students at Harvard, They watched them shave. They had them give feedback on the razor, and they built different versions of the razor over time and got it to the point where these Indian students at Harvard really liked the razor. They then took that razor to India, and it did not sell at all. Rather than giving up, they started to do focus groups in India, and they realized that most of the men in India who were shaving with their razor were doing it sitting on the ground with a hand mirror and a cup of water and no shaving cream. Totally different experience from somebody in a dorm room at Harvard who may have the same coarseness of beard but has running water, shaving cream, and a totally different environment in which to shave. And it was through that process of actually sitting with the poor and understanding how they shave that they redesigned the razor, and it's very popular in India now because it's actually solving a problem that poor men have in India. That's the kind of work that Grameen does. When we develop a solution, we actually sit with the poor, try to understand their problems and the root cause of their problems in the context in which they live. We also don't just design with the designer. It's really important to have a bunch of different points of view in the design process, different stakeholders, including the partner with which you hope to work to bring your solution to scale. And so it's important to see the poor as a partner in design, and to also have different roles inside the organization and outside the organization as a part of that design process. And then we never get the design right the first time. It's a very iterative process. And one that we do very rigorously, and it's a very useful part of design and also of technology development, is this iterative concept. We know what the problem is with being poor. You don't have enough money. But we can't solve that because it needs to be scalable, and we don't have $1 trillion just to give to poor people. And so we always design solutions and prove out early that they have poor benefit. But having poor benefit is not enough because we need to scale our solutions. And we know that we don't have the cash to scale them. And the world doesn't have the cash to scale them just for philanthropic purposes. And so we involve partners in our solutions and develop a solution that works for the poor and also for the partner. An example is around a bank account. So if there are 2.5 billion people in the world who don't have access to bank accounts, we would love for the poor to all have savings accounts because it's a secure way of saving cash. It helps them build credit. There's a lot of reasons why it's a very good thing. There are a lot of banks out there that don't think that the poor are a viable market for savings accounts, and so we've worked with them in the past, particularly in the Philippines, to prove that there can be a savings account that is beneficial to the poor and also can help the bottom line of a bank. And only through proving that out can the bank run with it, which Card Bank in the Philippines is doing after our project ended with them. So getting that, for Grameen, getting that partner involved and having it make sense to them for either their market needs, if they're a for-profit company like a bank or a mobile network operator, or as a government with outcomes that they're trying to reach around health or economic development or agriculture. Figuring out what they want and helping design a solution that works for them, and then working with them to bring it to scale. That's a really important thing that we've learned over the years. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about today was the concept of intermediation. So in the United States, where I've been for my entire life, I've seen that technology is disintermediating so many industries. Where we used to go through middlemen, we are now able to go directly to the source, whether it's for information or to buy things or to sell things. Technology has disintermediated whole industries and disrupted them and reshaped our economy. And so it's really easy to, it's a really logical thing to think that technology in the developing world is going to do the same thing. And I believe it is going to do the same thing. I just don't think it's today. And or in most cases, it's not today, because that's what we found at Grameen Foundation, is that with the poor people that we work with, in our work, we found that having a trusted intermediary going directly to the poor, finding the poor, helping them access information, access services, buy products, sell products, brings about behavior change and is more effective than disintermediated efforts. And so a lot of the projects that we've implemented have an on-the-ground field force that is like an agent force that works with the poor, either to bring them financial services or, in the case of the farm management plan, to be a trusted advisor in helping them become more effective as a farmer. And that, we found that to be true. Like I said, I think it's a point in time where right now intermediation is incredibly effective, and we will likely see the communities in which we work changing to where they can take advantage of more and more disintermediation. But there's all sorts of reasons why that's not particularly effective today. So let me stop there, and we'll open it up for questions. Let's see. So,
thank you so much, Steve. So one of the questions that we received from the audience is, what factors are necessary to be successful in developing innovation for countries in need?
So innovation, there's a lot of rigor that needs to go into innovation. Part of it is the design work. You have to have great ideas that make sense in the country in which you work. So you have to understand the local context really well. There are so many ideas that are created in the Bay Area, California, or somewhere disconnected from the reality of, let's say Western Uganda. And when those solutions are flown in, they don't work. And so that in-country context is really amazingly important. Another piece is having that iterative validation cycle. What are you going to prove about your innovation early on? And then as you learn things and you redesign your innovation to work based on what you're learning, what are the next level of things that you can learn to the point where it's actually useful at scale?
Thanks, Steve. And we have what seems to be kind of a follow-up to that question here. How crucial is having a consumer insight before you design a tool? Or do you design and test different tools as you uncover insights, kind of testing as you go?
Yeah, we design a concept pretty early on, and that often is that's often based on our experience. So the idea can come either because of patterns we've seen working in with Kenyan farmers, for example, but we very quickly validate that with real work with real folks who would be in the affected population. So sitting down with farmers to say, you're a poor farmer and you grow maize, and when your crop comes in, you have to sell right away because you're poor, and you get a very low price because everybody's crop comes in at the same time and you can't hold on to it. So let's understand the root cause of that. Like, why aren't you getting the best price? Why do you have to sell right away? Why can't you hold on to your crop? And from that conversation, then we can come up with a couple different concepts based on that and then test those out. So it's both. We try and, we're smart, but we don't trust our own ideas. We absolutely validate them with real folks on the ground and as quickly as possible.
Thank you. We have another great question here from the audience. The question is, Steve, what are your thoughts on the privacy and security of the poor as more of the information is becoming available digitally?
Yeah, this is something that Grameen's very concerned about. We work with a lot of very at-risk populations. And it gets more complicated by a couple of factors. More and more information is stored in the cloud. And where is the cloud? It's often, you're not even sure in some cases where that data is. The other thing that's related to that is countries have very different privacy regulations. And so we work in countries that have very lax privacy regulations, and we also work in countries that have some of the strictest privacy regulations in the world. And so what we focus on is upfront consent. We get consent from everyone we work with. And then what we have to do from there is to make sure that our systems we have a privacy policy and make sure that our systems are tracking to that privacy policy, and that we understand where our data is going and what laws apply, because we obey the law in all the countries that we work in. And then when we do make information accessible to the public or to partners, that we do it in ways that the privacy policy allows. It's usually almost always de-identified data. So changing names, removing phone numbers, latitude and longitude is is something you might not think about, but a farmer, if we know the latitude and longitude of where their farm is, that's personally identifying information. And so figuring out what we can share and how we can share it based on that original consent and our privacy policy, and understanding kind of the global landscape of laws, that's what the trick is.
Great, thank you, Steve. And kind of moving in a little bit of a different direction, we have a question here. It says, technology implementation definitely can help the organizations to function more efficiently, but it's often a very costly investment. So how does GF help the organizations overcome this hurdle? And if the solution is to implement technology at a lower cost for the organizations that you're working with, how is GF able to sustain itself?
Yep, that's a great question. Any kind of investment in infrastructure is often very challenging for nonprofits. The economics of how nonprofits are funded and how they work in the surrounding kind of larger market climate causes us to underinvest in the systems we need to scale, to be successful and repeatable. There's a great article called The Nonprofit Starvation Cycle that gets to some of the factors that drive this situation. But it's a true situation, and we've taken a bunch of different tacks on this, but we've had 2 projects over the years that were specifically designed around how to help organizations work better in a couple of different scenarios, and how to make that more inexpensive for them. So one was our project called MIFOS years ago, where we built an information management system for microfinance institutions back when we were focused on microfinance. And the idea was that laws require that these small nonprofits generally, or social businesses who are microfinance institutions, needed to track financial information and do it in an efficient and secure way. And so we built a technology platform to do that. That has now spun out of GF to an open source project, and it's in use around the world. Is it inexpensive to implement that kind of system? It's all relative. What we think we did with MIFOS and what the MIFOS X project, the open source project, continues to do is to try and make that cheaper to implement. Currently, we have a technology system called TarWorks that enables our farm management plan. For example, we use TarWorks on tablets so that all our CKWs go and visit farmers and gather information and bring information to those farmers via TaraWorks. It runs on an Android tablet or an Android phone and connects back to our data and our data processing, so that it allows for that field force to be connected in two directions, data in, data out. What we've tried to do, what we've done with TaraWorks is we've invested by raising grant money, by spending our unrestricted dollars on turning TaraWorks into a technology product that has an annual fee but doesn't have a lot of the other IT costs associated with a system like that. And so our effort with TaraWorks has been, how do you provide great functionality that a lot of development organizations need, productize it so that it's pretty generic, so that somebody could use it to take an M&E survey or also to run a social business and find new customers and manage sales, and do it all in a way that where the costs are understandable and as low as we can make them.
Thank you, Steve. And that's a good segue there when you mention M&E. We have a question here. It says, have you used any technology for monitoring and evaluation in any of your projects? In the past, M&E through cell phones has not been very successful because of the questions and surveys complexity. And now that the M&E landscape is changing, do you foresee cell phones being a big part of that again?
Yeah, so we use TaraWorks for data collection. We've used other things. TaraWorks is what we use across Grameen today. And a big investment in TaraWorks was, how do you make a survey builder that can meet the needs of people who are gathering all sorts of different kinds of data in all sorts of different kinds of scenarios. And so you can go to taraworks.org, TAROWORKS.org, to see that, to see TaraWorks and see how it's being used, to see some customer stories about situations where it's being used, and also get a demo if you'd like to see it. But that's what we're using today in all of our programs that are gathering that kind of data.
Thank you, Steve. And it looks like we only have time for one more question. So we have a few different callers on the line who want to know if you have any advice for anyone out there who is an information technology professional who's looking to develop solutions for the poor or get involved in some kind of development work. What advice would you have for them?
I think working, I was a technologist in a for-profit space, and I made the switch over to the nonprofit world, and I did that by getting laid off from my startup when it went out of business and kind of retraining myself and going to work for a nonprofit. I think there's maybe a better path where you can work with a nonprofit or a development organization who is doing interesting things in technology and has a lot of things you could learn around working in context and doing design and iterating in the field that would be very difficult, I think, it would be challenging to learn all those things. And there are a lot of organizations out there like Grameen who have that knowledge, and it can be, through a volunteer project or an internship, can be a great bridge to understand, well, what does it really mean to do technology work in the development sector?
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for taking the time to answer some of these great questions. And I know that there are a lot of questions that we didn't get the opportunity to answer, and they all were fantastic. So thank you so much to our audience for being very engaged. Clearly, they're all very happy to hear you speak today and very interested in the things that you touched upon. So I want to thank everyone. Thank you especially to Steve for taking the time out of your day to present this to us today. And thank you to all of our volunteers and audience members who have come and listened to our Bankers Without Borders webinar. Just as a final note, I want to remind everyone that our webinars are recorded. So if you have any friends who missed it and want to send him the link. Let him know that it will be available on our website in the next couple of days. Thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.